Hi guys, today I've got another electric bike from China on the table. This one is the LOTDM200 II, if you forgive me. I won't repeat the name often as it's absolutely impossible to remember. But the bike is unforgettable. It has loads of features that impressed me. I really enjoyed doing this test again because I got a really nice product to try out. So, as usual, as you're used to by now, we'll do a little unpacking and assembly first, then move on to the specs. And finally, I'll share again what it's like to use this bike, who I'd recommend it to, and what for. So, unpacking time. It comes in a big box, yet it's a relatively light bike. Obviously has an aluminum frame, and if I recall correctly, its net weight is 24 kilograms, which isn't a lot for a bike like this. So it's almost, let's say, portable. Almost everything is pre-installed. You get the front wheel separately, and you need to attach the handlebar together with the handlebar rod. Install the seat, put on the front fender, and fit the front light. Once you've done that, the bike is basically ready. Of course, you have to do the usual stuff, like adjust the brakes. For this bike, nothing had to be adjusted with the gear, so no problem there. So just the brakes needed adjusting, and then we could start our test ride. So that's unpacking, that's assembly, simple as pie. And if you have even a tiny bit of technical skill, you'll manage. Let's quickly move on to the specifications. Well, obviously we're talking about an electric bike. Obviously it's a rear hub motorbike, and obviously it's a brushless motor, as that's what all these bikes have, just like that. What makes this bike special is that compared to the recently common 250 to 300 watt bikes, this has a 750 watt motor, which is awesome. And what's great is that this 750 watt motor delivers a maximum torque of 36 Newton meters, which is again very awesome. And the key thing is the battery, which is 48 volts and 13 amp hours. That's not exactly awesome. A 13 amp hour battery isn't massive, especially not for a 750 watt motor. Of course, we have gears, the usual Shimano gears at the back. This is a two shifter, the usual low-end shifter, but it doesn't really matter much because the torque comes from the motor in the rear wheel, so we don't have to transfer torque through the chain and shifter. Therefore, in my opinion, this cheap shifter is just fine for these bikes. We have 7 speeds, if I remember correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, we've got 7 speeds. We have a front light, a back light, no indicators, but it's nice that the rear light is wired into the electrical system, as is the front, so the rear light also works as a brake light. Very important is also the front shock absorber. It has non-adjustable preload, but it's lockable, which means it's good for hard surfaces like asphalt and cobblestones. And it's well suited for off-road too. The manufacturer says it has front and rear suspension, which is true in a sense, as there's a telescopic fork at the front. There's no telescopic shock at the back, but under the rear seat there's a kind of rear shock. Well, we can say that there's some kind of damping element, and the seat is pretty soft too. So from this perspective, let's just say there's front suspension and the back has this sort of suspension. The handlebar height is adjustable and the seat height is adjustable too. So I guess that's about it. Okay, let's talk a bit about the exterior before I get to the riding experience. We've covered the specs. What should we know? It's worth knowing that we have a relatively nice wide handlebar. You can clearly see the side shifter on the right side, the throttle, and of course a brake lever. On the left side we have a brake lever, a horn, and a control group that lets us operate various things. With these 2 buttons we can control. the gear and the assistance strength, you can activate that. You'll see a small foot icon below to turn on walking mode, a light switch, a power button, and an info button. What's interesting is that we have a relatively large color display, and this large color display can be activated by NFC. It looks like this. Unfortunately, it's not highly visible in sunlight, but what's good is that it is large, and the angle can be adjusted, so we can make adjustments while riding to prevent the sun from glaring too much. What else should you know? You can naturally turn it on with this power button. Then you'll need to enter the code, which is the default code 1212, and you can check it, but it's pretty much irrelevant. We can also turn it off with NFC, an important point being the info button I mentioned. With this info button, you can switch, and for example, you can see that the battery voltage was 49.2 volts, which is pretty great, as it's much better than those green lines because you can actually see when the voltage will drop so much that you can't ride the bike anymore. If you switch, you can see here the performance. You can see the time elapsed since it was turned on, the distance traveled, and a lot of other things. That's basically it. You can also turn it off. So this looks really good and is very usable. I really like this cable tie section, which isn't the usual spiral thing that people use to tie cables, but a Velcro strip with the company's name. It's kind of odd, and I don't know if you knew this. I always tried to read it as one word, like semi-bike or something similar, but it turns out it's semi-bike. It makes complete sense. Let's move on. I really like the paint job. I like the lettering. Everything looks great in my opinion. The bike's paint job also came out really well. I really dig this gray color. It's got a bit of a metallic vibe too. At the back, of course, there's a disc brake and mechanical disc brake. And at the front, naturally, again, disc brakes and mechanical disc brakes. The front light is a projector light. And there's a rear light too, which is just your standard one. I'll turn it on. This is how it looks, and here's the brake light. There's a fender at the front and back, although these are plastic fenders, not metal, but I think they do their job well. Here's the gear shifter, which is a 7-speed, as I mentioned, and here at the front is the lockable, unlockable suspension, and that's roughly what the bike looks like. What's interesting is that the seat seems like a big, soft, comfortable seat. Honestly, I didn't quite like the seat shape with its upward curving rear part. But maybe you like it, so I won't say if it's good or bad. I just wasn't a big fan. The pedals are metal, which might be important, so that's pretty much all there is to say. So now we can talk about what it's like to use this bike. At first glance, one might think this is a city bike, and indeed it looks like one. It has a really strong rack, which I think is a big plus. Fortunately, most Chinese bikes nowadays, if not a standard, often come with such racks fitted. They come factory equipped. This is a big improvement because in the past we only had a front light and a rusty one. Compared to that, most bikes now, or at least many bikes, have rear lights already integrated into the electrical system. Here are the mudguards. Here is the rack, so you don't have to buy them separately. And I think this is an improvement. At least over the years, we are getting somewhere. So, how is it to use the bike? Initially, I thought it would be purely a city bike, but it's a bit different. I based this on the frame shape and the rack. The frame shape because the pipe comes down quite steeply which isn't the usual setup for fat bikes. Generally, for these bikes, the pipe that holds the battery usually meets the frame here, and from here there's an extension that holds the pedal. On this bike, it goes right down the bottom, and the pedal is attached to this section. So I thought it would be a city bike, but as it turns out, because of the suspension and the soft seat, this bike is really good for off-road too. I tried it on forest paths, on worse quality roads, and it was really comfortable. In fact, you could say the front suspension was a bit too soft, which is great that it can be locked, because when it's firm on paved surfaces, it gets really soft. So if you're using it on tarmac, make sure to lock it, because it becomes much more stable. But if you go into the woods or on poor quality roads, feel free to unlock it, as it will be super comfortable and won't jar you. Your wrists won't hurt. The handlebars and seat will stay stable, which is really smart. Your wrists won't get shaken by the handlebars and seat, so it's great they designed it this way. One downside is probably the size of the battery, because I mentioned that it's a 750 watt motor, which is relatively strong, but the 13 ampere hour battery isn't much. Of course, the manufacturer's specs have all sorts of nice numbers, like the distance you can cover, if I recall correctly. With assist, it's 80 kilometers, and without assist, it's 40 kilometers. I hope my memory serves me right. You obviously can't cover that much distance without assist. I guess if you want to ride normally, you might get about 20 kilometers out of it, but I think that's the maximum you can get. Without assist, if you pedal really hard, and the motor doesn't have to work much, maybe 45 to 50 kilometers. But even that's probably a bit of an optimistic estimate. What was it like to ride it? Well, there are two things I definitely have to talk about. First, this is a relatively cheap bicycle, which means it has a pedal sensor instead of torque sensing. With the pedal sensor I've mentioned before, it works by engaging the motor at maximum pressure when you start pedaling. And when you stop pedaling, the motor shuts off. So it's an analog switch-on, switch-off method. You can change the level of assistance, but obviously only through the pedal sensor. It means adjusting the top speed at which the assistance cuts off. This is factory set at 25 kilometers per hour, but you can change this, and I'll show you how to do it. So to disable the speed limit, you have to press the plus and minus buttons, and then the service menu appears. In the service menu, you need to go all the way to point 8. Point 8 is where you can set the speed at which the assistance cuts out. It can be set up to 100 kilometers per hour, or more precisely 99. There's no way the bike will reach 99, as I'm sure you can guess. I've set it to 97, effectively removing the upper limit, so the assistance will work as long as the motor can handle it. Why is this important? Well, it's important because this bicycle will always be considered a motor-assisted bicycle, not just a bike, since with bicycles it falls into the category of... The rule is that you need to turn off the assistance when you reach 25 kilometers per hour. This bike is set up for the 25 kilometers per hour assistance, and it's still simple. It will be a moped because it has a throttle, which means you can ride it without pedaling. Plus it has a 750 watt motor, which is more powerful than what's allowed. So I definitely recommend turning off the 25 kilometers per hour limit on the assistance if you're not afraid of speed, because it's totally unnecessary. Just because it's on doesn't make this bike a regular e-bike. It will still be an electric moped for everyone. But let's get back to the pedal sensor. As I said, this is a cheap bike with a pedal sensor, not a torque sensor. This could mean that the bike will start very strongly. I don't know why these bikes now use more expensive sinusoidal controllers. They are good because they smoothly build up the torque. So it's not like it immediately kicks in when you pedal. The 36 Newton meters and the the 750 watts don't come immediately. There's a small transition at the start, enough so that you don't feel in danger. So when you're standing at a crosswalk or entering a roundabout and you move the pedal, it won't rocket you into traffic with 36 Newton meters. There will be a gentle transition, and this bike has that, which is good, because you can ride more comfortably and pleasantly in the city. Otherwise, it rides smoothly. With the throttle, the electric drive managed nearly 100 kilometers and accelerated to 41 kilometers per hour on flat terrain, even on a slight incline. If you don't want to pedal, you can still go at 40, which basically means that I can commute among cars in a relaxed manner in a small town, not in Budapest, for example. Another positive feature I haven't mentioned yet is this handle. This part, which is positioned at the bike's center of gravity, allows you to lift the bike. Even if it's quite heavy, you can carry it by this handle. A bit, if you're not very strong, don't try lifting it because it's too heavy. But if you fold it, you can more easily place it in a car or maybe on a commuter train by carrying it by this handle. Or there's a bike space on the train to sum it up. So I like this bike, not only because it's strong, not only because it has quite good torque, but I also like its design. It's not the usual Chinese electric fat bike look that we're used to. It stands out from the crowd a bit, but I like this design anyway. I like it. I like the finish. I like the welds. Overall, I got a very positive impression of the bike at first glance. We're talking about a well put together bike made from quality materials and parts, obviously by Chinese standards, because let's say I definitely wouldn't call the Shimano Tony shifter a top-notch structure with this SIS switch. But as I said, since the torque is in the rear wheel, it's fine. Basically, it serves the purpose perfectly. I like the cable management. The whole bike is compact, even though it has a thick frame and thick tires. I'd almost call it airy. Airy, obviously, it will never truly be, but somehow it's still much less bulky and beastly than similar fat bike models. I'm not going to mention a price at the end of the video, but if my memory doesn't fail me, with the coupon code I have, you'll get it cheaper by 180,000 forints than the regular store price, which is fairly reasonable. Well, that was the video. I think I covered everything. If you like the bike, check it out in the online store. The link is in the video description, along with the coupon code. I've also written an article about it. Go read it too. There will be pictures and maybe a bit more information. And subscribe to the channel if you liked the video, and I'll be back with another test later. Bye.